Last Pint Productions presents the New Way podcast. The New Way contains adult content, including the chance for you to own your own piece of the New Way. That's right, we've opened up the New Way to the public so you can start your own New Way podcast. Don't miss out on this exciting franchise opportunity where you too can spend hundreds of dollars and not make a single dime. The Ben Wilson beer budget alone is enough to bankrupt even the savviest of investors. But hey, you can't take it with you, am I right? So start up your franchise today and enjoy this week's episode of the New Way podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
You have a movie, Mysterion. You're in the third Coon and Friends United movie, after your Netflix series.
Yeah, but he's saying he doesn't ever get his own movie.
Do I get my own movie? Not everyone gets their own movie.
The franchise plan sucks!
Yeah, and I think Timmy was right. We should start the whole thing with the Tupperware movie. Right, start with a black superhero.
Marvel made a black superhero movie.
Yeah, now? They waited years to get to that. We follow their plan. We do all the real people first, and we sneak the black guy in phase 3.
Everybody wants to be naked and famous. Everybody wants to be just like me. I'm naked.
Will you help teach me about this? What is it? A new way?
Hello and welcome once again to the New Way podcast, where you can hear us, me and Ben, and sometimes Nick, talk about all kinds of things that you might be interested in. What do you think we might talk about today, Ben? What interesting things do you think we might be bringing up on this episode of the New Way podcast?
I would like to talk about the Cambodian insurgency of the Khmer Rouge in the late 70s.
God, I was thinking the exact same thing. That's so amazing.
This is a history podcast, right?
We are really in sync today. I mean, we can tie it in a little bit into pop culture and maybe go some Hearts of Darkness, Apocalypse Now references in there.
Black Panther.
Yes.
Obviously a metaphor.
Wow, look at how smart we are, and people have no idea. They just don't know that we're not just a couple of chuckleheads over here, only knowing about the movies and the TVs and the whatnots.
Yes. But we're cultured people here.
We are of the culture. Thank you so much for tuning in to the New Way podcast. We hope you're enjoying it. I want to make sure I give a shout out because I don't think I did this before on the podcast, but about a month or so ago, I was in the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, and I met up with a bunch of my high school friends. And a couple of them have started listening to the podcast and actually were commenting on things that we were talking about in the podcast and stuff.
Nice.
So I know Miss Dr. Rick Bedoya, who is actually a medical doctor, listens to our little show.
He's not the fake kind of doctor.
He's not a fake doctor. He's a real, gets in there doctor.
He's like,
so
I got a PhD and an MD behind my name, bitch.
This is true. Well, I believe he has an international business degree because it was not his first path. Let's talk more about Dr. Rick Bedoya's career path here on the New Way. This is one of the many topics we will sometimes cover on the show.
International businessman.
He's an international businessman of medicine. So he's the medicine man, like that movie by that I forget what it's called, but it's The Medicine Man. That is the name of the movie
with Sean Connery.
Yes, that is correct. He is the medicine man. And I believe
where he tries to fight the people that are tearing down the rainforest.
And I believe he's Scottish, like he is in every movie, even if he's not Scottish. So It works out well that way.
You know what movie makes the most sense for Sean Connery to be in? The movie where he actually plays a Scottish guy, which is Highlander.
I'll listen. I like his version of an Irishman in The Untouchables the most. So,
there you go.
So
Irish, but hey, at least Andy Garcia brings a little bit of reference to it.
That's
you
right.
Stinking Scot-Irish pig.
So
I like him.
I like him. Such a great movie. But thanks for tuning in. We have lots of fun things to talk about today. First, our last episode, we were hours before the Game of Thrones premiere.
Yep.
The premiere has happened. Ben, what were your thoughts on the return of the final season of Game of Thrones?
It was a lot of setup and a lot of stuff that you had to get through. I think you're basically gonna see balls to the wall from here on out, is what I kind of feel like.
I didn't find it to be slow.
It wasn't slow. No,
No.
because I mean, there was something huge happening, but it was all huge in sort of the sense of like this had to happen in the progression of the story where all these people are meeting at Winterfell.
Well, and I was trying to remember because I distinctly remember this happening in another big show, and I don't know if it was Lost or something, but I remember there was another show where there was you were getting to the final season and there were a lot of reunions happening, and it was kind of
I think it was Lost.
And I don't know. I was trying to remember if it was Lost, but I don't know that necessarily is the case. I just remember it was a big ensemble show, and the characters have been split apart for a great deal of time. So there was this thing that had to happen in this first episode back. So it was all these people, lots of hugging,
Right.
lots of whatever. But I don't mind that. I think the
No, it's
showrunners
fun.
are, because they seem very apologetic. I was listening to a lot of the discussions after the episode, and they were very apologetic. Like, we didn't want it to feel like just all of these reunions. But I'm like, but it is, and it is also for the audience as well to be reacquainted with these characters.
Well,
I don't
and
mind that.
The obvious difference between Game of Thrones and something else that you might be able to compare it to, like a Lost or whatever, is that a lot of these characters are being reunited that were only together in literally the first episode of the first season. And so a lot of these characters have not seen each other for, I mean, in real world terms, 8 years now.
Sure.
And so that's a pretty big thing. So that's the other reason why it's just like, of course you're going to have to get them all together, because you have to progress the last season of the story, where it was obvious that when it comes to a battle royale between, you know, the forces of good and the forces of evil, essentially, you know, to steal the Jamie Lannister line, you're going to fight on the side of the living. So you kind of
very nice.
So you kind of had to put all of those characters back into the same sort of fold.
Yeah, and I liked that each of the reunions had a different
Feel.
weight to it.
It had a different feel.
And you've got, and there are ones you don't even, the shows, so much happens in that show. So there are little things like Tyrion and Sansa, and you're like, oh shit, are they still married? We don't know exactly if technically those two are still married. The last time they saw each other was, like, there's some crazy shit going on with some of these reunions.
And then they make out.
Yeah, where it's like, oh wow,
Steal a line from Nick.
I totally forgot that this this thing was even happening. And I mean, Arya and the Hound, I think, is my favorite use of 3 lines of dialogue to instantly solidify an amazing relationship, which is the last time I saw you, you left me for dead, and her going, I robbed you first, is the fucking greatest thing.
And he smiles.
He smiles. He goes, you always were a cold bitch.
Yeah.
It's probably why you're still alive.
Yeah.
That's 4 lines of dialogue that tells an amazing story, and it's the performances and the writing and the direction. Just, it sells a moment like that where you're like, fuck.
My wife and I are continuing to watch back over the show. We did not get through the whole series before it came back on. So we're making our way towards the end of season 3 now. But then you also realize these little moments that I'd completely forgotten, since it's the first time I've ever gone back and watched through it. I'm having a great time doing it. The last time that Arya and Gendry saw each other, he said, she said, you'll be my friend. And he goes, no, you'll be my lady. And I'm just like, I'm wondering if this is just like, because they had this weird kind of sexual tension thing going on in that scene. And I'm just like, I feel like they're playing it towards that, like, they're going to get together, but then Gendry's going to have to die.
Yeah. Well, I also, that was one of my favorite memes of, it's basically her handing him the piece of paper for the weapon, but in the meme, it's just, she's just drawing a penis on it. It's just amazingly. I have to say, I have to hand it to the internet. Sometimes the internet is the worst.
It goes so fast.
Is the worst place on the planet, but the speed and quality of the memes that resulted from the return of Game of Thrones was absolutely note perfect, from all of Cersei's elephant jokes, which was so great. I also love someone.
I really wish we'd gotten those elephants.
Well, I'm trying to remember. It was one of the recaps reviews. Maybe it was Ozzy Man. I can't remember, but it was basically like Cersei saying what the producers were saying versus what the effects department would be like. Thank God we don't have to make those fucking elephants, because we don't need any more creatures to have to worry about. Right,
exactly.
Show. But yeah, I thought it was a wonderful return. I thought they did a pretty great job of it. I loved that they the whole opening is a complete throwback to Robert riding into Winterfell in the pilot. I mean, the really,
imagery is like tit for tat with the first episode of the series.
And I think that's a pretty amazing thing to pull off for a show. And we've got 5 episodes to go, and I know some of them are very large episodes.
Yeah, well, it is interesting also just seeing how the aesthetic has completely changed, because you have these characters having this reunion, but if you remember, like in the first season, I mean, winter was still coming; it wasn't there.
Yeah,
and it felt very lush and like green.
Yes,
and now it's just destitute and kind of sad, dead place.
Winter has come,
and I think that's kind of a preface for what's happening this entire season, which I feel is going to happen this entire season.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one. Sansa has a line about it, and I think it's gonna. I don't think there's anything they have time to necessarily delve into, but she's right. The original, there was still a concern before the White Walkers about winter,
right?
Which was having enough food and being able to house people and keep people safe.
Well, even without Sansa says it in this episode, where she's like, "We only have 2 years worth of food."
Yeah, so I mean that's another part of this that like they could get through the White Walkers and be like, oh shit, we also like still don't know how to live, and we've still got a lot of major problems on our hands. But yeah, I'm on board. No,
of course. I mean, how are you not going to be on board at this point? I mean, the show has done nothing except for inspire more and more goodwill in its viewers. It's never treated the viewers like idiots. Even when they made what I considered strange narrative choices in seasons, I feel like the like all the stuff with like Bran and Hodor and Jojen Reed, which is technically kind of book stuff, but I always still felt like the payoffs were so good. Like that episode, I remember up to the point of the end of the episode, I was just like, this is such a bizarre episode with like so much weird like necromancy and skeletons running around and fireballs flying all over the place, and then you get to the Hodor thing at the end, and you're just like, shit. It's always almost worth it, much more so than a lot of the shows I feel like that had this type of fan base, a rabid fan base, but occasionally there were major missteps. I would say that they're just minor in the case of Game of Thrones.
Sure, and there's something interesting with me, I think, also with Game of Thrones, and I think it is just me, but I for some reason I've never thought I was like crazy about Game of Thrones. And then every season I watch it, I really like it. And then something happens in the off season where I kind of forget
how good it is.
How good it is. And then when it comes back, I'm like, fuck, they really are just they're making these little movies for us on HBO.
It's definitely playing on a kind of a level of its own. I mean, there's a reason why it inspired all the fandom it did. It's not like A Song of Ice and Fire was a huge property that everybody wanted to adapt. It took years.
Sure.
It took years for them to convince HBO to do it and give them money. And apparently there were people before Weiss and Benioff who tried to say, hey, let's think about adapting this. And Martin was just like, okay, who's Jon Snow's parents?
Well, yeah. And that's the thing also is that I think part of it is that it never felt like a puzzle box to me. And maybe that's why I think with puzzle box shows, I'm more like, I gotta know what happens. I gotta know how it ends. I gotta know how it ends. And I'm less concerned about how things are going to end on the show, or the mysteries aren't really as important to me as I just love the character interaction in the show. I really do. And unlike something like Lost that did have great character interactions, they were still always overshadowed by this promise of a reveal or a thing, versus Game of Thrones. I mean, yes, there's an unknown about where the plot's going to end up, but it's not like I have any great I'm unlikely to be dissatisfied with whichever way the plot rolls in this thing at this point. Yeah. I'm kind of just on board for whatever.
That's
happens.
Awesome. I mean, it's just a really well made show, and I think that ultimately, discerning TV audiences are going to look back, and this is including both from a critical standpoint and just a remembering the show standpoint. I think it's going to be considered that show of the 2010s of this decade. And I think it is going to be the defining show that people look back and remember, whether, if you want to go back over all the decades and say like that show was like the X-Files was a 90s show.
Sure.
Lost was the show of the 2000s or whatever you want to say. If MASH was the show of the 80s, then Game of Thrones is the...
I think so. Now, I was reading a quote by from Kit Harington where he just kind of basically said, it was a funny quote to me because they're basically talking about the critics and reviews of this stuff, and he was like, you know what, fuck anyone that wants to shit on this last season, fuck you. And he goes, look, you can find fault with anything.
You're paraphrasing here, right?
I'm paraphrasing. No, I'm not kidding. He literally was just like, fuck. He basically was like, fuck you. He goes, I watched all these people put heart and soul and tears into this show. I goes, whatever you think of it is
like,
one
I had
thing.
to kill my wife.
Yeah, I was like, he basically was just like, I know what went into this, and you can say whatever you want about it, but I saw what went into it, and if you can find a reason to not love that, then that's on you. And he goes, you spend, and I love it. He goes, you spend 30 minutes just like ripping apart whatever we did over years and years and years. And the article I was reading out was someone who actually is a critic for the show, and they're like, I take offense that it usually takes me 45 to get through. So it was pretty good.
I'm sure that he's salty. I still remember that quote from him, like after they did 7 Days in Hell, and he was just like. Apparently he had just spent like 4 months in like northern Iceland shooting or whatever, and then he goes to 116 degrees like right outside of Death Valley playing on a tennis court, and 7 Days in Hell, and apparently like at one point he just broke down. He was just like, why can't I be in something where the weather's fucking normal?
And he just kept yelling at HBO. He's like, HBO just fucking hates me. That's all I want to do. No, he is super salty. Did you watch any of they released like a making of this previous episode, The Return?
No.
That's where I saw that there were the cameos by Rob McElhenney and Martin Starr. But he has a bit where he talks about getting on the dragon. He was like, it was great. He goes, except at one moment, my right ball got caught underneath myself and like trapped there. And I was like, oh, great. This is how I'm going to lose a testicle. And
like swinging by dragon.
And then he just stops, and you can hear like there's a little bit of silence, and you can hear the crew laughing. And he's like, oh, I guess maybe that was too much. But they kept it in, which I thought was great.
That is great.
I mean, I guess of all the shows, how do you shy away from someone talking about a ball when you've watched many worse things happen on it?
Yeah.
It's shifting to a little bit to a show that I've become very uneven on. I don't know if you're still watching American Gods or not.
No, actually, so I gave up on American Gods during the first season, and there were things about it I liked, but reading the book, tonally, I got something totally different than what they presented that first season. So I haven't come back to it.
It's I don't know how to describe. So it's kind of like, so aesthetically, it's still beautiful. They clearly know how to shoot and frame and color and set design, everything. It is gorgeous, but they've turned it now into, it's almost like God of the Week. And so we meet like a new god, and we're absorbed in briefly the plot kind of filters in and out of that god's world for a week. And that's fine, but I have no basis anymore in the characters or the through line of the show, because now it's become like this tourist attraction to just like, oh, here's Thor here. Yeah, exactly. Here's Thor. Here's this character. Here's this character. And
that's ironic, where the culmination of the
show was about
a tourist attraction.
Correct. And I'm also waiting to see if they're going to get there. But then sometimes they do amazing things. Like a couple episodes they did, sort of the birth of technology, kind of, and it was this really pretty moment in the show where it's this young child, and he's like playing a Game Boy, and he's like sitting there, and he's like obsessed with the Game Boy, and then the father's like, it's time to practice piano. And so he goes and he plays like perfectly to the metronome, perfect, beautiful music. And then he's back to his video game. And then like he keeps growing up, and he goes to college, and he hears this piece of music that his father had once talked about liking. And so he goes back to his computer and he starts working, and he comes home and he plays this composition for his father. And his father's like, this is beautiful. This sounds like the thing is this one that I haven't heard of? He goes, no, I created it through algorithms. I took all of these things and I made it. And the father is like devastated, and he winds up dying. And the kid plays the music at his funeral. And as the music is playing, everyone in the crowd starts like tapping their foot and getting into it. And that's the birth of kind of this technology, internet kind of thing. And there are moments like that I think are beautiful, but it's like, there's no glue in between all of these little vignettes that are happening, and I think that's part of losing your two showrunners and cast members being unhappy too.
All it took me was 2 episodes for me to decide that the showrunners who tackled the property didn't understand it.
Well, I'm wondering. They didn't like what they were being pushed into with it.
Right.
I mean, it's Brian Fuller, who's normally pretty.
But see, the thing is, I don't think that Brian Fuller, who I also like, I don't think is infallible.
No, absolutely not.
I don't think that his aesthetic matched super well. I felt like they were just going way too dark with it, which I think that the concept of American Gods is that all of this violence, it's actually kind of funny. It's supposed to be a lot more darkly comedic, and that this violence is kind of randomly happening around.
Sure.
And it's very macabre and very. I would have approached it in a way where it was more along the lines of, like, where it feels a little bit more accidental, like all of the stuff that's happening to Shadow and all the stuff that they're going through. There was something amiss just with the way they were attacking with such a serious tone, and the funny lines were like badass funny lines, or like they were, and I was just like, there's no like kind of magic. I'm getting buzzed.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
And it just
randomly like hits, and I don't know, and again, I'm gonna have to find out if we can hear that in there. I'll remember to check on it, but I think we're probably okay. It may just be something in our monitors, but
who knows?
It's an interesting. It is a little bit disappointing, and I'm hoping that we don't have a similar thing with Good Omens. Although the tone of that looks more proper, at least in the previews.
That's also a proper miniseries. Apparently, that's only 8 episodes. Right?
True.
Yeah, which I think is when you know you're not having a second season or whatever.
Yes,
and it's just a matter of you getting through, the actual content of what's in the book. That's great. I mean, that they have a definitive end, and they have people. I mean, you watch those trailers, and that's the thing. I watch the American Gods trailers, and I always be like, something's not quite right. At least what I always expected with the tone. That's not the case with Good Omens. Good Omens looks like fucking Good Omens to me.
Agreed. Excellent. Well, let's move on to our main topic. And what I'm going to also do real quick, Ben, is I'm going to mute you so you can unplug your mic for a second and plug it back in and see if maybe that'll fix her. And I'll get it started. I've finally figured out how to silence Ben on here. Are you in again? Oh, there we go.
I'm in again, but I still hear the buzz. Yeah. I think it might be a monitor thing. And
it might be.
We'll figure it out.
We'll find out. If you're hearing a buzz at home, you're not alone, and
it's still going to sound a lot better. Than the first 31 episodes of the show.
Yeah, everything is always better than the first 31. But we wanted to speaking of long running series.
Girls I slept with.
Whoa, man. Jesus, that was awful.
That's exaggeration.
Gross.
That's not really true.
Exaggeration, no, maybe. So yes, wanted to get into our main topic, which is franchises. So, like we said, if you want to open up a Little Caesars,
franchising,
merchandising. So movie franchises.
Last Pint the movie. Last Pint the flamethrower.
The kids love that one. So movie franchises are all the rage now.
and there's this one. Me.
May the Schwartz be with you. Very nice. Very nice. Any more treats? I would definitely buy a Ben Wilson Any More Treats doll. If you would buy a Ben Wilson Any More Treats doll, let us know. I can make this happen. I know people. Like, I'm going to China.
I work in the toy.
I am going to China in October. I can get that doll made. I can make this happen.
It's a little pull string doll with a beer in its hand.
It's gonna just be like half passed out and eventually just like losing the ability to speak. But
no, there have to be multiple dolls. There can be the normal version of everybody, and then there can be like Awakenings Ben.
No, I think what it'll be is that it runs on like a 24-hour clock. So by the time you get to like 23, it's like any more. And then just a bill. Eventually, you just pull the string and it just goes, and then it calls an Uber. So movie franchises. This is a huge thing right now. I mean, always has been, but really right now, there seems to be a push for franchise before anything even happens in a property. It seems to be much with the focus of how can we franchise this? How can we make more of this? What can we do to make this wider? And we have something that I don't think we had before, which is we have something, I guess I don't know if it has a name, but I would call it a mega franchise, which is the Marvel Cinematic Universe that has its own franchises in itself. So Marvel has, in fact, every one of its properties, with the exception, I suppose, of the Hulk, even though he winds up in other movies, but pretty much all of their standalone movies have been turned into what I would consider franchises based on having multiple entries for them. So there is an Iron Man. Okay, come on now. Now you're just being ridiculous, Ben.
You tell me. Listen,
and the buzz went away somehow. I don't know what happened.
Oh well, what happened is the microphone just said he was about to make a terrible comment like, "I hope that Black Widow franchise has multiple entries" or something along those lines. But no,
we just did an episode on sexism in film. We just had that episode happen. We ruined all our goodwill.
This is why it's called irony, and this is why I'm joking. But anyways,
oh, that was a Weinstein quote, right?
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. No, I don't know, Nick. What do you think about this? Oh, for those of you that don't know, Nick has been bound and gagged in the corner for the entire episode up to this point. He's like, I want to say something quippy. No, Nick will be joining us on future episodes, but and I think that he would actually have a really interesting perspective on this, just because he was a comic fan, a true comic fan. In his, not actual literal infancy, but in his infancy, of pop culture, of absorbing pop culture. I think that it's a reactive industry film, especially when it comes to large, well-performing movies. And what I think that we've seen with the expansion or at least attempted expansion of the DC universe, and them trying to do like a monsters extended universe with the old classic Universal monster movies and all of these other things conceptually just span. And I figure we get it out of the way because they all came from looking at what Marvel was doing.
Sure.
And they said, wow, this is creating something unlike anything. Because I still remember, even though the Marvel movies were fun and we were having a good time with them, Iron Man comes out, and then Hulk comes out, and Hulk kind of whatever.
It's fine. It's not as bad as people want to make it out to be, but it's not great.
Thor is like, whatever. I mean, people don't realize, but it took a while for Marvel to get it. It
really took until the Avengers put them all together.
So that's what ended up happening. Is the Avengers came out, which everyone expected to be this giant clusterfuck, and it was delightful. It was a lot of fun, and I think it was right after the Avengers came out. Avengers came out in which I believe was
fake nerd. How dare you?
Which the Avengers was 11, right? Or was 11 or 12 when it came out? 12.
Yeah, 12, I think.
And so all of a sudden you have these, multiple different franchise opportunities with all of those characters, plus the ones that hadn't even been conceptualized yet in that phase.
Sure.
Of the Marvel filmmaking universe. And you have these other, movie companies and distributors basically saying, there's a shit ton of money to make here. Get me in on that. Like, how can I get in on this? Because I think that before that, you were relying off of the traditional franchise model, which was that you made one film and you put a lot of money into it. Sometimes you didn't. Sometimes it was an accidental thing. But for your major tentpole studio films, you would put a lot of money and a lot of marketing effort into it, and if it was well received, then you were a go for a sequel. And that's just was the way things worked, pretty much from Jaws on.
Yeah.
And it didn't really change. It didn't. I mean, it transgressed all different genre. And the way that people sometimes even receive the film. I feel like a lot of times movies got sequels that because they made money, even if they weren't that popular.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and I think there's a couple of things in kind of that history that we can look at. One is that franchises did sort of exist when there was an existing property. So for example, James Bond is probably the most famous, which was based on books, right? So you've got a book series that has a built-in franchise potential. Whether they were going for that or not, they said, hey, here's 32 stories or how many Bond books were written by Fleming. We want to turn these into a movie. The first one works out well. Oh, great. We've got another one ready to go. And I think there were other books, similar things like that. If you're looking at like, I don't know, like the Hardy Boys or like there were other properties that were book based, I think, that were kind of on that. Then you also had horror movies, and horror movies were a whole different thing because they were cheap.
Yeah. I was about to say horror movies were almost easy to. They were more of a convenience.
Sure.
Thing, as far as the way that those were. I mean, because a lot of horror movies weren't even marketed. I mean, they just kind of came out. And they made twice as much as they cost. Yeah, well, they only cost $1.5 million to make.
And they always, and the second one was always cheaper to make than the first one, and then cheaper and cheaper, until they drained every last drop out of it.
Exactly.
And so I'm not really counting those necessarily in as far as our.
Well, there are some nice outliers of that too.
I mean, there's an Alien franchise, which is essentially was
that's
a
lot of diminishing returns there. I mean,
it's a horror franchise. Well, I mean. I wouldn't say the second one was, but so that's another question. So there are trilogies and there are movies with sequels and there are franchises. And I don't know that there is a necessarily a hard, fast rule. I think it's more of an opinion of what you feel consists of franchise versus consists of a series. So you could look at something like The Matrix, which was a standalone, simple movie that did extremely well. And then that bred these other two movies. And you can say, okay, is there a franchise? I mean, they did do a straight to DVD anime, which to me put it toward the franchise realm. Or is it just a closed trilogy and that's it?
They also did a video game that was that was canon as well, which is pretty interesting.
Okay, so I would say then that probably fits in franchise. But something like The Hangover doesn't seem like a franchise to me. It just seems like a closed series that really shouldn't have been
a series at
all. But and I think that's where I think it's when these ones finish and there is no reason to go back to them, that they cease to, I think, be franchise potential.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that's just kind of depends on what you define as, because I would almost say that here's what I would not consider a franchise. I don't consider The Lord of the Rings a franchise, just when I'm talking about the original Lord of the Rings movies.
Okay.
I'm not talking about The Hobbit. The Lord of the Rings, they went in planning and shot 3 movies. You know what I'm saying? And they did them all consecutively in order to save money. And in order to get the scope and style that they wanted to in that time. I don't consider that a franchise because it was pre-planned. Like but
it became a franchise.
But I was saying, I think it became a franchise, but ironically, here's the weird thing where this is why it's all kind of defined by, I think, the eye of the beholder. I don't think it was changed into a franchise until Peter Jackson was just like, I'm going to make 3 Hobbit movies instead of 2, and they're all going to be the same length of the Lord of the Rings movies. Because at that point, I was just like, you don't have enough content. Like, I understand that you're putting stuff from the Silmarillion and all this other shit in there as well. But now you've got a show that's also in canon with those that's happening at a different time of the Age of Heroes. So, I would say it became a franchise because stuff that wasn't originally intended to be there started kind of getting lumped in with it.
That's an interesting way to look at it, to say that when does something leap from series to franchise? You could argue similarly, you could argue Harry Potter
or Star Wars.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could argue Harry Potter before there was Star Wars became franchise so quickly even just from a merchandise standpoint, because they were doing the Ewok movies, there was a Star Wars Christmas special.
I'm just saying the first thing you see in A New Hope is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope.
You originally just saw Star Wars. There was no A New Hope.
It just said episode 4.
Episode 4. But that was it. There was no other crawl. There was no New Hope. It was supposed to just be this chapter, but they didn't no idea whether or not they were going to do another.
Right.
And then once it starts into Empire and they're doing the Christmas special and stuff, that's franchise. And Harry Potter, similarly, you could say, okay, they had 7 books, they did the books, but then they went and started Fantastic Beasts. Now we say, okay, now this is, I would still argue it's a franchise before, but
I'm 100% with you that's one that I feel like definitely jumped and became more of a franchise thing where you're like doing stuff that's within this universe and you're creating new stories and that type of thing. So I think that there is a point where if you're basing stuff off of noted material that you have that's there and it's on the paper, then I still consider that a series if you're going to stick to the book. But once you start expanding on that universe, and once you start adapting all of these other characters and tertiary characters and doing stuff with them, and like you said, that's what happened with Star Wars, is immediately all of a sudden all of these different things became marketable within the canon of that, and people started expanding on it because, it was the 80s when all of a sudden all those books started coming out. People started writing about the Star Wars extended universe.
Well, and it's interesting. If you look, from a standpoint of how they're even labeled, it's kind of interesting. If you look up film series or franchises online, they now are starting to be labeled as such, so that you've got the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a franchise. Right. J.K. Rowling's Wizarding World is a franchise right, separate from Harry Potter. So it's kind of when they rank franchises, number 3 is J.K. Rowling's Wizarding World. Number 4 is Harry Potter. Like, that's a crazy thing to say. There's a franchise within the franchise, the same as you have with Marvel, where you've got these other properties right, that make it up, and then you've got things like the X-Men, which is interesting because X-Men has rebooted and relaunched and rebuilt and kind of,
but not really.
It didn't seem like it was, but it did. When First Class came out, that was definitely, at first seemed like it was a different.
Yeah, but ultimately what they did is they found creative ways to do reset.
Sure, yes.
To hit the reset button. And I still think that puts it into it's still the same universe. It's still the same franchise.
Yes.
But it
is a franchise. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. Versus in the same. So then you've got something like Batman, which also shows up on your franchise list at number 5.
Right.
And that's interesting to say because you're looking at all of the Batman films, even ones that exist in other franchises. Like if you talk about Nolan having his own Batman franchise,
Snyder
or
having his own,
and DCEU. And let's before we
Adam West,
but before we get away from the DCEU, so they don't get away scot-free once again, I do want to discuss something that's just so fascinating to me of how they manage to literally do the exact opposite while trying to emulate what Marvel's doing. I don't know if you read this came out today. They've been developing the Swamp Thing TV series.
Oh, I heard about how they pulled the plug on the
they basically halted production and are now changing it from 13 episodes to 10, like in the middle of doing it, and just be like, rewrite this last thing so that it makes sense, even though we're way into production on this thing. And I'm watching DC and I'm going, look, I understand there are financial decisions being made here, and it's a lot of money to shoot 3 more episodes.
It was built for their first off. It was for their streaming platform,
which they're now not sure
if it's going to happen. That's what happened here.
Yes,
I guarantee you that's what
100%.
And I understand, and I saw a very critical quote by Virginia Madsen as she
got pulled immediately.
Oh, did it?
Oh yeah, it got dropped. It got deleted very quickly.
No,
pretty awesome.
Just because it's like, I understand when you're on set and then all of a sudden they're just like, nope, we're not doing the last 3 episodes. Rewrite this. That's a shitty situation to be in as any type of creative when you're on there working on that set. I think that they're looking at this and they're seeing the speculative analysis of what's going to happen with all these streaming services, and they realize half of them are going to fail.
Oh, sure.
And that's going to be one that fails. It's not.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it's ever going to actually happen. So here's what's going to happen with Swamp Thing.
Isn't the DC service already isn't that where there's like the series has got like the young ones on it
is it? I don't even
I think
know.
it's a thing. Yeah, there is a DC service already happening. I think they're going to pull the plug on the service. The service is already on right now because there's the Teen Titans, the live Teen Titans is on that service.
Well, yeah, I don't think it's going to happen anymore. And I think what's going to end up happening is if Swamp Thing is any good, it's going to go to another platform, to a streaming giant, maybe a Hulu or an Amazon or a Netflix.
If it's any good.
If it's any good. And it will find another life there. And if it's good enough, then it's going to get a second season. And I understand that perspective too, because they don't want to spend a bunch of money on a proprietary platform on a show that nobody's going to end up seeing. And I understand that. But it just sucks.
Whoa.
Pardon me.
Oh,
Sorry.
Good God. Oh,
Sorry.
It's everywhere.
Oh.
So much.
Sorry, I just had something in my nose.
Oh, why did the mic work so well at that point? Oh,
I turned away
I could
too.
feel it.
I turned away.
It was like 4D. No, I think that is definitely a discussion for another podcast. I do want to talk streaming services and that thing 100%. But yeah, I just thought that was kind of interesting to watch them just not quite understand things and be like, they just saw Marvel cancel shows and saw and that's Marvel, doing that,
right,
and see the backlash, and they're just like, oh, well, it's weird to me. But
I don't know if that's what they're seeing, but I also, which sucks because I really like Swamp Thing a lot. I don't
know much about it.
I don't know if you ever did you see the Wes Craven Swamp Thing?
I've seen it. Yeah, it doesn't really.
It's not very good. It's got moments, but it's not very good. But yeah, it's a cool property. It really is. And it would be really interesting to do as a series, to an ongoing series if it was done the right way. Which it seemed like that's what with all the design and stuff they were doing.
Well, I saw,
really...
and the showrunners were the guys that did Sleepy Hollow, which I really liked and had a really very, I think, similar aesthetic and kind of a slightly wry sense of humor and a little bit I thought it seemed like a good match, but I'm interested to see where that goes. So let's shift again a little bit. We talked about some of the bigger franchises, but there, I think, are also smaller series and franchises out there. And one that's near and dear to my heart is the View Askewniverse, which is the Kevin Smith universe of films. Now, do we call the View Askewniverse a franchise?
Considering there are multiple Clerks movies and multiple Jay and Silent Bob movies, I think
a new one coming out soon.
I think it qualifies.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's an interesting one to think about. It's not a huge moneymaker. It is not. It is very popular amongst who it's popular amongst, but it's one that sort of bucks a lot of what you would normally attribute to a franchise of huge stars and huge whatever. But I like it because it has a following and it has a connectivity, which I think is also interesting in franchises to say. For them really to work, I think there needs to be a desire to see other people interacting with other people in this universe and this grander scheme of things, or how they fit into the larger picture of what's going on in the universe, which is, that it's definitely what Lord of the Rings does. It's what Harry Potter and Star Wars and all of these things are doing. And I think that's also why we're seeing the move of franchises to television properties. And one of the reasons I started this episode off Game of Thrones is Game of Thrones is one of those that is building a franchise on television.
So here's what it is. It's a series right now, and it's about to become a franchise. Because as soon as this show wraps up, then we're going to have, the one that happens 2,000 years beforehand, and we're going to see, what happened in the Golden Age, I think is what they were talking about it taking place in. And so it's going to be in the same universe with things, actions that then reverberate in the current series that we have, structures that are built, castles, keeps, that type of thing. The way that certain families are, moving about or doing whatever, that's all going to. So when you have that, and then all of a sudden you have something else that you can look back at the original series and say, oh wow, it's so cool, like that's what happened. I think that's the definition of
Yeah.
a franchise, is where you have things that are totally, at least from a plot standpoint, non-related, but they're completely related to one another.
And I like the idea of seeing those things on TV as well, because it allows them some room to get around. And I like that Star Wars is moving to some live action TV things. That the Mandalorian looks to be really promising, especially
Lots of talent involved with that one.
Yeah, and that was what really. So the Mandalorian, for those of you who don't know, is a
Star Wars
TV show that was spearheaded originally by Jon Favreau as kind of like really getting it off the ground. And then now, but he's picked like 6 really good directors for each of the episode. You've got the guy that did the Clone Wars series. You've got Bryce Dallas Howard. You've got Taika Waititi. I think Favreau is directing one of them as well. Yeah. But you've got these things, and it's about a bounty hunter similar to Boba Fett 5 years after Return of the Jedi, and basically this like down, dirty, grimy kind of cantina frequenting character. Where I also read that Bill Burr plays another bounty hunter in it, and I'm like, okay, I'm so fucking in on like that should have been the log line. Like the Mandalorian, Bill Burr is a bounty hunter. I would have immediately been on board.
But is not the Mandalorian.
Is not the Mandalorian. But I like seeing that franchise move to it. And well, the other thing is that they've just
wait, hold on one second. I have to laugh because I keep thinking every time, and it's one of those things where I'll read it and I just keep laughing because all I think of is like the time machine from Back to the Future made of men, the Mandalorian. And
oh no, the Mandalorian.
The Mandalorian.
I think it's just a single man that turns into a DeLorean.
It's like Kit from Knight
He's
Rider.
The reverse transformer.
It's like,
oh no.
Anyways, yeah. Sorry, I had to.
Oh, that's gonna be in my head all night.
Now every time you see the title of that show, you're gonna be like the Mandalorian.
Oh man, DeLorean. Okay. Yeah. So. Oh shit! I just lost all. Oh no! They've announced also. So they've given the original guys, the Benioff and Weiss from Game of Thrones, are getting their own Star Wars series to produce on television.
Right.
And they just literally a couple days ago announced that they are developing a Knights of the Old Republic thing, which is everyone's kind of putting 2 and 2 together, saying that the Game of Thrones guys are going to do the Knights of the Old Republic as a TV series, which is
based off of a video game.
Yes, but also just it's such a good marriage of sensibilities, and I think that's the one key element that Marvel did well. And that DC really tried. I will give them credit at least
not for a lack of trying.
For trying, but Marvel was just a little bit more successful in choosing different skilled people to flesh out these worlds so that you could watch something that felt consistent,
right,
but different enough that it was satisfying. Although if you are really anti-Marvel, you will tell me exactly why I'm wrong about that and how every Marvel movie is exactly the same and I don't know what I'm talking about. And
5 years ago may have had an argument. Absolutely do not have an argument anymore.
For those of you, I say you're not enjoying what is the greatest thing happening right now. But so for you, Ben, do you have other franchises or little franchises that you, not little, but things that you really are into that you kind of dig, or new things that are coming up?
Well, so it was interesting just thinking about movies or properties or things that turned into franchises because that weren't supposed to, or turned into series because they weren't supposed to. Because one of the things that I immediately thought of, and I don't think it's a franchise, except it kind of do. It's very strange how it strikes me, which is the Godfather series, because the Godfather was based off of a book and pretty well covers the major content of the novel. And so immediately upon the amazing, reception of that movie, and as a Best Picture winner and Best Director winner, Coppola goes on to make 2 because Coppola wanted to continue the story.
Interesting.
He was
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so he was the one. And now there were parts of the novel, The Godfather,
That did the prequel stuff.
that went back to the prequel stuff. But there's a whole lot of more modern day stuff that wasn't really in the book. And then you get to The Godfather 3, which is its own thing.
Yeah. Which was all him, just being like, I have this hard on to
somehow wrap up the story. And I honestly think that if Godfather 3 wasn't considered kind of a flop by a lot of people, which it was, that he may have made more.
Interesting.
And so I kind of do think that The Godfather is an unintentional franchise. It was something that was supposed to be made as a kind of a one-off thing. And then Coppola used his clout to kind of turn it into something else.
Interesting.
There's series like that. That's the exact same thing that happened with, of course, bring it up, Alien. Is that was an unintentional franchise. The first movie did really well, but they didn't really have a plan on making a sequel to Alien. It wasn't nobody who was involved with the first film was involved with Aliens. Nobody. And so when they came in, because Fox obviously had the rights to the property and to the characters or whatever, and Cameron and I forget the producer's name. She worked with Spielberg a lot later.
It's okay. We forgot her name last week as well.
Right.
We're so sorry, whoever this is. I should look it up so we're not.
It's not Kathleen Kennedy, but it's she's a famous producer. Anyways, they came in as these like kid upstarts basically, and everyone, the people at Fox apparently were just like, "What the fuck are you doing to this?" Like, yeah, we're not gonna. And it was only based off of their take on it and selling enough people at Fox to do their take of oh, hey, we can turn this into something completely different. Then all of a sudden, Alien becomes a legitimate franchise. It turns into a fucking action movie.
Yeah.
Then the second one. And that's cool because it's a badass movie or whatever. But
Gale Ann Hurd is the
Gale
name
Ann
we're
Hurd.
looking
Exactly. Gale Ann Hurd. Yeah, but so people thought that Gale Ann Hurd and James Cameron were just nutso. They were just like, well, who are these kids who are coming in here and like telling us how to like run this? You know, they want to make a movie with the alien character. No, that's I know it only came out 4 years ago, but it's that's a heralded thing there. We don't want to touch that. We don't want to besmirch the reception of our Alien movie.
I think that's a really good definition almost, or a definition we can make for this of kind of what defines franchise. I think you have sequels that advance plot and characters, right? So if you look at, and this is previous to the version that came out a couple years ago and the new one, but Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2, I don't feel, other than the cartoon is where it fleshes out. That's where I think it gets franchisey. But Ghostbusters, let's take a look at just the movies. Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2, those are just a movie and a sequel to me, because I don't feel that there's any examination of the world of the Ghostbusters.
There were lots
and
of
things.
Different Ghostbusters cartoons, though. That's the only thing I'll say.
The real Ghostbusters cartoon did 100% look into Tobin's spirit guide and what goes on in the containment trap and all these things, where you have these questions that are getting answered. And I think that's what turns something into franchise. I think you could have done Aliens with another alien and another ship and whatever it is, except now we're getting the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. We're getting more information on what's going on with them. We're branching out and we're learning more about the universe in it. I think that's what defines your franchise building, is that it's not simply just, hey, let's rehash what's going on. It's not Home Alone 2, right? Where you're just doing the same plot or you're just doing another situation with these things. You're explaining
more about that extended universe.
So because that is really what opens up your opportunities for a franchise, is saying what else is out here in this stuff.
So by that definition, and I'm just saying this not because I believe in it, James Bond would not technically be a franchise until they start getting into those movies that start to correlate a little bit later.
They would just be a series and not necessarily a franchise.
Yeah.
Now, by that definition, the Mission Impossible is not a franchise. Well, it was a TV show, so that's tricky because Phelps was in the original, so it was technically a continuation.
I think that Mission Impossible rides the line between being, because here's the thing is, right now, if you look at the history of Mission Impossible, the films, they could be a TV series.
Sure.
You could take any one of those films and turn it into a season worth of TV. The second season would have sucked.
Yeah, it would have been bad.
It would have been like the second season of 24. But
or the second season of Lost before J.J. Abrams comes along and fixes the third season, just like the real thing.
I actually like the second season of Lost, which is funny because I don't love the show. I didn't mind the second season of Lost at all.
It's the beginning of the beginning of the third season. It's till the end of the third season.
The third season is where things
Correct,
go off.
Yeah,
off
that's
the
the
rails.
Nikki and Paolo shit.
No, the second season is where they just go back and do everybody's story.
Yeah, and we get the tail people, the tail of the plane people.
Right.
So that's interesting. So again, if we use this new definition, then I would consider John Wick to be a franchise. Especially because John Wick also has very clearly opened itself up to
and
franchise
you are learning
potential.
a lot more.
Yes.
And you have the possibility for spin-offs and games and all of that stuff, which is kind of
I think really even in the first movie, once you get to that hotel, you're like, oh shit, this is 1,000 different stories that we could tell
it's
here.
a bigger
if we
universe.
wanted to. But yeah, I think that's one that's
didn't they say that was a thought that they were just going to, what's the name of the hotel?
I forget what it's called, but we also see who they're casting in these movies and bringing up people like they're going to make more of those.
But they said that they can make a show
yes.
like that was just based around
I think they are developing something already.
I'm pretty sure they are.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that obviously is where it gets you into franchise territory. But once again, it's the happy accident of having this kind of singular story.
Sure.
Told in
no
sort
one
of
had
an ocular sense that where it's like you had a single view and with everything closed around it. And now you have these great flourishes and great moments of mystery and things along those lines. So as soon as that key is unlocked and the public response to that, you just say, "Oh, okay. Well, let's just take off the blinders from everything else around this and let everything else start creeping into that universe." And I think that is a great. I think it's a great barometer for what makes a franchise is because when you can start correlating things that that only happened in the first movie, then it happened in the fourth movie, or it's like the show this crossover from that and that this is doing that. Yeah, that's I think that's where you're getting into what a franchise. Now, that's not what Hollywood's going to consider a franchise. Hollywood's going to consider a franchise, and producers are going to consider a franchise, and studios are going to consider a franchise any property that continuously makes them money every time they release a movie. There wouldn't be that many Transformers movies if there wouldn't be a Transformers franchise if that wasn't the case, because the Transformers movies are fucking god awful.
Yeah, but Transformers movies also falls into a different thing, which is kind of interesting, is what goes on as far as foreign cinema for us, and it sort of sucks, but I also sort of understand it. Is that so? Transformers works because when they ship that movie off to China and to other countries where there's not a large English speaking audience, and even though they dub a lot of stuff, it's easier to dub robot speaking and yelling at each other than it is humans. And there's also not a lot of nuance, so it's kind of easy to just throw those things in. And typically that's what a lot of the especially, I mean, really is China is the biggest one. A lot of the Asian audiences want spectacle, and that's really what they respond to, is what they can see. And I'm trying to,
it's just not even Chinese. It's Chinese, Korea, Russia,
yes.
India. I mean, all of these
and what's
places.
really interesting is I read that was one of the biggest issues with Solo. Is that Solo made very poor international numbers because it didn't do anything it wasn't anything they necessarily recognized, because it's this prequel idea, and it wasn't enough of a spectacle that it worked for them. It was too much character. There's too much talking and other things going on in it, and that's a very dangerous thing. It's a very dangerous lesson for a company like Disney to learn that way. That really concerns me at times of how does that color what they do in the future? I just like that they're smart enough with Marvel, at least it seems, to just not
infringe
concern
on what
themselves with that, because these things are making so much money anyway. it really doesn't that doesn't matter.
If
much.
there's any more money to be made at any point, though, if they could some people I feel like in those situations, and I hate to color an entire industry in a poor light, but it's true. Like some producers would sell their kidney for a movie to make $3 million more domestic.
Sure,
and it's sad because they're trying to hit some sort of mark.
Do you think that'll happen with Marvel? Do you think we're heading that way?
I have a feeling that things are going to change a lot. And this is kind of, I don't want to speak too much about Marvel because I know that we've talked about Marvel a whole lot, but in the next phase of Marvel movies, I feel like there are going to be some changes. I think that their format is going to evolve a little bit. I also think at some point in stage 4, and I'm not talking about in the very immediate future, but I think that Kevin Feige is going to withdraw himself from the universe and focus on doing something different.
Interesting. I don't disagree necessarily with that. And what's interesting also with that is that they do have a lot of established properties already that they still want to close out. They want to close a loop probably on Doctor Strange. They want to close a loop on Black Panther. Chris Hemsworth clearly has said that he will make like 1,000 Thor movies if they let him, unless of course he gets cast as like the new James Bond, which point maybe that becomes less of a concern.
I think it would be a really good idea for Thor to have one more movie. I think it would be a really good idea for Ant-Man to have one more movie. And then I like the idea of kind of these 3 film closures. Whereas like Iron Man was obviously sort of the template and went there, and we have the 3 Iron Man movies, and then the Avengers movies are all just kind of like Iron Man centric as well. But I like the idea of kind of giving them the 3 and out.
I mean, Thor had his third. I mean, Thor's done technically.
How?
Ragnarok, The Dark World,
you're right.
and Thor's
right.
done.
You're, well, but so
Doctor Strange has 2 to go. Black Panther's got 2 to go. Spider-Man will have 1 more.
The only reason why I think Thor might be a little bit different in my eyes is because he had a big role to play. He of all the characters, I mean, he's grown the most, and I think has grown into that role the most. And I think that you could definitely sustain one more Thor movie.
Well, I mean, Ragnarok did fucking phenomenal. I mean, Taika just knocked that out of the park, and I think they'll, from a money making standpoint, they're like, sure.
Yeah,
let's
they
do another Thor.
They can do one more.
Or,
Thor
I mean,
movie.
do another Thor Hulk. They can't do a Hulk movie in their own legally.
Yeah,
so,
or do a crossover.
Yeah.
And like have the next Thor movie be like Thor and Doctor Strange, since they were the best part of.
Or Thor and Captain Marvel would be actually probably a super fun pairing as well for a space adventure.
Imagine Doctor Strange and Captain Marvel, like all the shit that they could do together.
That'd be scary. I'd be very scared of those 2 personalities together, but that's what's fun about that.
Well, if anything, I think that they're kind of the most alike, just in normal temperament of their human selves.
And
then they're both also super powerful.
Yes.
So
it's interesting.
And I want to see them fight now. Holy fuck.
Yeah,
I want to see Doctor Strange and Captain Marvel fight.
Well, this is why listen, we talk about Marvel a lot on here, and I'm
it's because
listen, we're going to again in 2 weeks after the new Avengers movie comes out, and our minds have been.
We're going to talk about it more.
But of any time it makes sense is on a episode about franchises, and we're proving why this is a franchise, because we're sitting and talking about 2 characters who have not interacted together but are in the same universe, and we're like, oh shit, I would like to see those 2 characters have a conversation.
Yeah, it's the same thing we would do with Game of Thrones or with
Absolutely.
any other thing, where we're just like, man, if those 2 characters meet up, it's gonna be badass.
No, and we've done and historically as people, everyone did this in Star Wars. We talked about characters encountering other characters and what these things would be like, and I think that's what's really cool about a great franchise, and that's why I'm glad we got to talk about John Wick, because I very much liked the possibilities with that. And there's another one that I want to briefly talk about, because it's gone through 2 separate franchises, and the first I had 0 interest in at all, which is the original Planet of the Apes. The original Planet of the Apes movies
I'm not a huge fan.
Did not do anything for me, but what they did with their retcon, I thought was such a completely unexpected.
Tim Burton's take was just unbelievable.
Oh man, that movie is goddamn terrible.
Well, so actually, I recently listened to an interview with he played the Tim Roth.
Oh, poor Tim Roth.
So poor Tim Roth though said he said he would work with Burton any other time. He said that they were getting like constant pressure from the studio to change pages and pages worth of the script like every day. And so they had no idea what they were performing. And then he said, so all they did was like, okay, we're going to try and be apes as best as we possibly can. He's the best part of the movie.
He is. You know why I said poor Tim Roth, though, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, do you know why specifically?
Why?
So Tim Roth turned down a franchise to do Planet of the Apes. Do you know what franchise he turned down?
What was it?
He turned down being Severus Snape in the Harry Potter films.
Right, I knew that.
Which I can't imagine he's super enthusiastic about nowadays. But no, that movie is terrible. But the new ones that started off with James Franco and John Lithgow, largely human-led Planet of the Apes that turned into more apes, it really showing that evolution. That was one that definitely felt franchisey to me in that it explored this universe much more in depth and kind of went to get some answers and some ideas as to what was happening in this struggle.
Well, one thing I can at least say about that franchise, as somebody who's seen all the older movies, is that they were always thinking movies. They were always metaphors or analogies for real world slavery and the ideas of civil inequality. And they were always thinking and science fiction films. And so I do like the idea that they were popular enough to kind of spawn their own thing. I think what I liked about the newer trilogy is they kind of combined sort of that social thing, but they turned it more into a scientific and more of a something not accessible from a completely different standpoint, where we're looking at Armageddon, essentially, or the end of the Earth. Not so much of just we're creating an obvious metaphor here for inequality. So when taken all together, I think it's actually pretty interesting. I think that they're good movies. They're well made.
Well, and I'm saving one franchise to talk about for the end here, because I know this is one that you are very interested in. It's coming out. A new part of this franchise is coming out this summer. I don't know if you're thinking about
Debbie Does Dallas.
No,
I don't know.
I wish. No. The new
I thought she would have gotten
Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
I thought she would have gotten through Austin, San Antonio. I mean, at least Fort Worth.
Debbie Does Boynton Beach was a terrible entry in the series. It was just a lot of Paul's dick.
They thought that Debbie Does Fort Worth would be the same as Debbie Does Dallas, but about 14 minutes into that movie, they realized they made a grave misunderstanding of their audience.
I like the one where she has sex in the basement of the Alamo. That's a good one. That's a deep cut right there. There we go. That was for Nick. If he's listening to the show anymore.
Where she rides the red bicycle.
That's what they call it sometimes.
That's what they call it.
Getting up on the old red bicycle. It's good times.
So the monster.
So you're much more into the monster movies than I am. Although I really loved. So I hated the new Godzilla.
Hate's a strong word. You didn't say you hated it.
I really disliked that movie. I just thought it was very cheesy and it just didn't work for me. But then I really liked
Kong Skull Island.
Kong Skull Island, which was great. I thought it was a great movie. And now we've got this new one that the previews look pretty fucking phenomenal for. Do you think that this is going to hit? And do you think the franchise is going to continue?
Well, first off, it's already a franchise because all of these characters have existed for 50 years in some cases in popular media, if not more.
Man in Suit.
Yeah. And so as a fan of a lot of those man in suit kaiju movies that I grew up with, of course I'm stoked to see a Godzilla movie. A good Godzilla movie.
Good Godzilla.
Godzilla is often good. But I would say I think one of the things that they did really well in the creation of that, and I mentioned this briefly on I think 2 podcasts ago, is what they're doing with those movies is they're giving the properties to entirely untested directors. And they're not really reeling them in that much. I mean, they gave the Godzilla movie to Gareth Edwards after Monsters, after a movie that literally cost $1.1 million to make.
which is a better movie than Godzilla.
Yeah, I agree. It's a better movie than Godzilla. Jordan Vogt Roberts had only directed Kings of Summer.
It's a good movie. It's a really
Which
good
is
movie.
a really good movie. But how do you give the director of a movie like Kings of Summer, which is a low-budget indie comedy that takes place in the suburbs, to Kong Skull Island? It's an interesting jump. Now, here apparently, the reason why these guys got the job, these various jobs, is because they're the ones with they had the best take. They came in and they sold the studio on their take of it. And I think what Gareth Edwards said, of course, this is kind of paraphrasing and going back to 2014, is that wanted to bring the scope of being like, I want to feel like what it would be like to be a person on the ground and understand that there is a 50-story monster that's like lumbering by you.
Okay.
And the idea of just creating that spectacle and that type of like, that type of feeling of just like you don't exist as a person anymore. You're not part of this natural order on Earth anymore. And so the larger tones in Gareth Edwards' movie I really like. I just feel like he did a disservice to the characters because the characters weren't interesting. The characters at the beginning were interesting.
Yes. The fucking Bryan Cranston, the whole opening of that movie was great.
It was amazing. It was so well done. And then they abandoned the interesting characters or kill them.
Yeah.
In lieu of having the much less interesting characters at the end. Kong Skull Island, I think that they're learning as they go.
Yes.
Here. But I appreciate the fact that they're at least letting the directors make the movies that apparently they want to. And so that's the reason why I'm just like, I'm super excited because it's Michael Dougherty. You got 2 movies to build off of. He's a risk taker from a directing standpoint. He wrote one of my favorite comic movies in X2. Was one of the 2 primary writers on that movie. And I feel like he can handle having all of these different monsters sort of within the same universe and have them face off.
Well, and it's exceptionally well cast, which is something that Kong Skull Island did as well. That they didn't skimp on who they were going after. Like even the people that didn't, there were 2 actors attached to Kong Skull Island that got replaced at the last minute, but they got replaced with like equally good. It was like
John Goodman replaced
J.K. Simmons, I think, was like okay, so we're keeping in and I think the other one was Michael Keaton, and he was somebody else in it. I don't even know who. I think maybe his character didn't.
I know that Samuel L. Jackson was a late.
Oh, then maybe he was replacing Michael Keaton.
Yeah, that's possible.
But yeah, I mean, I like when
Michael Keaton would have been great in that role.
Yes, he would have.
But Samuel L. Jackson is still really good in that role.
And I think that's a really important thing. That also is showing that the filmmakers are saying, "Hey, this is what we need, for this to work." And it's not like Keaton or any of those actors are really selling a ticket necessarily to the general public. People are going to go see that movie based on whatever. Yeah. That's definitely a director's thing. I have just a random question to kind of finish off our podcast. And you and I have, I think, somewhat talked about this, but this might be interesting to our listeners out there. So a lot of if you're new listeners, just so you understand, Ben is an accredited film school graduate, so I actually ask Ben a lot of things from a filmic standpoint that I don't know, or because I find it interesting, and I think you guys will as well. But how does it work? So the guy that did Kings of Summer, that moves on to a giant effects picture, right? Is that so? If I told, so you directed you directed things in film school, and let's say you had directed a feature, but it was a fairly straightforward kind of feature. And this isn't the only person this happened to. The same thing happened to Colin Trevorrow, who did Safety Not Guaranteed, and Mark Webb, who did 500 Days of Summer and then got Spider-Man.
Mark Webb's a little bit different because 500 Days of Summer actually had studio support. I mean, they had a wider release. But definitely with Safety Not Guaranteed. And definitely with Gareth Edwards is one of the big. Gareth Edwards funded that movie like it was selling his house and shit.
The guy that did Spider-Man Far From Home, that did Cop Car, which I watched with you, which is a super low budget. But you've got all these indie directors that really have no
cool movie though.
Yeah, great movie. But it's clear the studio knows they know how to direct actors and they know characters, and obviously they've pitched something of interest to them from a angle standpoint. What goes into actually getting on set and knowing what the fuck to do? Or is it because you've got producers and all these other people that you're really just sort of kind of guided through it?
Yes. So I think here's essentially what you have in that case. You got guys that are their ideas guys. And that's the thing is you want guys that are ideas guys. You want guys who can say, well, just imagine if this happened or like, here's what this could happen. If Mysterio did this, how cool would that be? Oh, wait. Here's what happens between Spider-Man and Mysterio at this point. You want guys who can think like that, especially when you are living in a world of carte blanche when it comes to those actual properties. So I think what it is that you develop the best concepts and ideas that you possibly can to get the studio on board. Once the studio is on board, you are surrounding yourself with people who have already been in that universe, with whether we're talking about from obviously a producer standpoint.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about your cinematographers, your set designers, your all of these people, people who know how to do this, and your visual effects departments.
Yeah.
Everybody where they're running 1,000 ideas and questions by you to make decisions every day. You're going to be the ideas guy, but you're going to have people who are presenting all that shit to you within the context of an existing universe.
Gotcha. So you're you got to still shit yourself a little bit.
You're still making 1,000 decisions a day. You're saying, I don't want that costume, I want this costume. Whatever. And a lot of times the studio and the producers and whatnot will come in and they'll say, hey, let's just rule this in a little bit. And that's what happens with your Lord Miller and why you get fired from
I was just thinking that.
from Solo. But there's oversight there. That's the reason why the executive producers and the producers are there. I mean, they're helping finance. They're the ones who secure the financing for the movie, and they're the reasons why it's really happening. But yeah, so you're still making those decisions, but the producers put these ideas guys into positions where all they have to do is make the decisions, and they're done. They're done. And they're going to be done by people who are competent and know how to do it.
And are going to probably also bring a couple of things of their own, maybe to how to sweeten it up or do whatever.
Hey, you know what? You should really work with these guys. These guys have the best ideas. These guys have and that's the thing is, especially with these big studio, like gigantic, especially with the Marvel movies, is like the Russos are great because they're aesthetically, I think that they have a genius outlook on the way that they approach the material. There are so many decisions to make in the creation of these movies. They didn't make all those decisions.
Sure.
The producers made a lot of those decisions, and we're just like, just do this, just do this, just do this. I mean, you can only answer so many questions within the waking life of your,
and that's why you have someone like Feige, and why you have,
and that's why you have, that's why you have assistants and associate and assistant directors and people like that who are there to help kind of reinforce your vision. And so ultimately that's what it is. It's surrounding yourself with talented people. So it allows you to make the decisions from a creative standpoint without handicapping yourself based on the fact that you don't know what's really going on from a technical standpoint. Yes. And that's – you don't.
But you learn. But you start to learn as you get involved.
You don't ever learn. That's the big misnomer to me.
Really?
Is because I feel like even Spielberg would sit down to the console and not have a fuck's clue of how to do anything from a digital standpoint. He makes decisions and says what he wants. They present him something, and then he tweaks it based off of what he says. He has no technical expertise in digital implementation.
No, but he knows like cinematography and some other things.
Oh, he is, and I'm talking about. I said Spielberg for a reason. Spielberg is a master tactician. He specifically says where he wants the camera to go, what he wants the move to be, what he wants it to look like. He knows his way around a camera. Yeah. He doesn't know his way around a computer.
Gotcha.
He doesn't know his way around. I mean, like all of the elements that go into making something like Ready Player One.
Yeah.
He has no concept of how to do any of that stuff. He's just saying what he wants it to do and what's
do this,
wants
do this,
to
do
look
that,
like.
do that. Gotcha.
And so it's more about making those decisions, and that's ultimately like one of the reasons why I think it's really funny when you talk about directors who have very specific aesthetics, like Tim Burton. Tim Burton's making the decisions, But I feel like there are also people kind of just saying, I'm going to make this because Tim's going to like this.
Yeah.
Or doing this one thing because Tim's going to like this.
Well, I think it's certain directors have certain things that they are more involved in because it's their skill set. Like Burton is going to be doing set design, and he's going to be doing sketches and working on that.
Off of his art.
Versus Spielberg is a storyboard guy. Spielberg goes crazy making his storyboards that are eerily exactly how it's going to go. Almost to a T.
Did you know that they didn't write a single or draw a single storyboard for Schindler's List?
Really?
They shot the entire thing documentary style. They
That's
just
pretty crazy.
cut out there and shot.
Wow. That's not how he normally
All
is.
he did was work with the actors.
Well, but that's a different than what most of his things.
It's way different than most of his stuff because it's usually meticulously storyboard. Anyways, I just thought that was interesting.
That's super interesting. No, and I mean, I think that's what's interests me about certain filmmaking. Like, I know that Chris Nolan is obsessive about cinematography. Like, he's a lens guy. So he is, that is his thing that he's looking at the most is what the cinematography is like. Each director has kind of their own.
Only he had a better cinematographer. Sorry.
God damn it.
I just don't like Wally Pfister. I think Wally Pfister's a pretentious fucking ass.
He's a terrible director. I know that.
No, he's a terrible cinematographer, in my opinion, too. But
well, okay. Well, this is the annual. Ben hasn't shat on Chris Nolan in a while, so
I'm not shitting on Chris Nolan right now. I'm shitting on Wally Pfister.
You're fisting Chris Nolan, and I don't appreciate it. Anyway,
Wally Pfister did not. By the way, you know what movies I love of Nolan's? The way that they look is I love the look of Insomnia.
Not Wally Pfister. Oh boy. well, that's how we're going to end the podcast for this week. Not because it was anything wrong, but I think we've discussed our franchises a little bit. I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion, and we're also always open to topics that you guys want to talk about. I guarantee you we've got a Marvel movie coming out next week. You're going to have to deal with Marvel shit with us for at least another week. And then after
that, we'll do an entire episode on Wally Pfister.
Well,
Pfister, I barely knew her.
I knew it. Well, if you guys want to chime in about this, I did have an idea the other night. As far as a podcast topic is, I was thinking about just kind of random movies, and I don't know how this specific movie came up, but it's a movie called Enough Said. With Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and it was James Gandolfini's second to last movie. But it's a small movie. It's a movie that most of you probably haven't seen. I don't think Ben and I have ever discussed it on air. I'm not even sure if you've seen it or not. Okay. But I really thought it would be interesting if we each kind of came up with 5 movies that we felt were
underserved.
Listen, Enough Said is not breaking down any
I think
walls
underserved is like movies that may not have been absorbed by enough audiences that we feel like deserve a space in kind of popular media conversation.
Yeah, just something interesting to talk about for 100%. Whatever reason is, and there's smaller, littler things. So I think of maybe coming up with 5 or so of those that'll give you guys some ideas of things to watch if you're looking for something out there. Although there's fucking too much
stuff.
But
too much tuna.
If we want to give you a little more tuna, we'll do that. But we thank you so much for listening to this episode of the New Way Podcast. We'll be back hopefully within a week with another episode, and we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.
Cheers.